Good day. Welcome to the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation's web talk, Fighting the BDS War in the Entertainment Industry, part of our series, Fighting Back, Responses to Jew Hatred. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of CAEF, and it's my pleasure to bring these important presentations to your attention, to introduce our audience to individuals and organizations that are making a difference in the war against Jew hatred. Today's web talk is sponsored by Hai and Cheryl Penn, whom I sincerely thank on behalf of our organization. Our co-sponsors share our concern about anti-Semitism, our goal of eradicating Jew hatred, our passion for truth, our love of Israel, and our Zionist pride. I thank the following organizations for their collaboration: the Lawfare Project, Club Z, End Jew Hatred Canada, the Israel Activist Calendar, Atlanta Israel Coalition, the Lodger Synagogue, the Afghanistan-Israel Friendship Association, the Mattathias Project, the Israel Committee of Sonoma County, Facts and Logic About the Middle East, UK Lawyers for Israel, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, European Lawyers for Israel, the Adath Israel Congregation, Americans for Peace and Tolerance, Jewish Resistance, the Rhode Island Coalition for Israel, Muslims Facing Tomorrow, Beth Tikva Synagogue, the Zionist Organization of America, Cherut Canada, Hasbara Fellowships Canada, the Israel Action Coalition of East Bay, Eye on Anti-Semitism, the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, and Liberate Art. Today, we are witnessing a steady increase in lies about Jews, Judaism, and Israel, a return to ancient tropes in new guise. Children in Toronto schools were greeting Jewish teachers with the Nazi salute. Teenagers in a Toronto school have protested on a public street against Israel with teacher commendations. An Al-Quds Day parade that called for an intifada. Plenty of people have seen these events as diabolical, and some politicians and a few media have made comments, but there's been no significant reprimand against the perpetrators. We are not seeing a dwindling in the amount or intensity of these events, despite some efforts to bring education about anti-Semitism to the attention of institutions such as school boards, teachers' unions, the city police, and the City Council of Toronto itself. The media are not even considering adopting the Holocaust, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which clearly enunciates that the demonization and use of a double standard to judge Israel are both acts of anti-Semitism. Our universities are almost universally hotbeds of anti-Zionist activity, a thinly masked charade to hide anti-Semitism. The key contributors are faculty, textbooks, and departments that promote lies, venerate the Palestinian Arab narrative, despite its being concocted on fallacious statements, and the usurping of Jewish history, and student associations that are affiliated and funded by the Muslim Brotherhood and its many tentacles in the West. Student union BDS resolutions that call to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel are being presented yet again on many campuses by these supercilious student organizations that wrongfully and deceitfully pose as social justice entities, and then unsurprisingly dupe others, even Jewish students, into supporting votes against the only democracy in the Middle East, the only country in which the rule of law means something, and where social justice is embedded in the very DNA of the people. Many of you will also be aware that Hollywood stars are in the BDS game, some as victims, some as perpetrators. With their enormous influence, some who are captive to the BDS movement are impacting the culture, arts, and entertainment industries across the Western world. From New Zealand to New York, from London to Mumbai, from Los Angeles to Toronto, the Jew haters are pushing performers and producers of art in all fields to punish Israel, to alienate Israelis, to ignore history, and adopt a fake reality, suggesting it is Israel that is the apartheid state, not Gaza, that Israel is ethnic cleansing, not Jordan, which destroyed 56 synagogues and forced all Jews to leave Judea and Samaria, where they had lived for centuries. Jordan then illegally occupied those territories for 19 years until they were liberated by Israel. These bigots claim that Israel is murdering Arab children when the contrary is true. And Western donor nations fund the UN Relief and Works Organization, the Works Agency, UNRWA, that trains children to be terrorists so they can receive a lifetime reward from the Palestinian Authority for killing a Jew, even a baby, a pregnant woman, or an elderly person. Ask yourself, how can anyone be so blind, so uninformed, so easily influenced, and then be convinced to participate in the politics of subterfuge, the campaign to denigrate an entire people in the largest hate crime industry of this era? Today, you will hear an analysis of how and why this is taking place and some things you and I can do about it. Before I introduce our guest speaker, Lana Millman, I want to remind you that your support of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation is very important. You can make a donation online at www.caef.ca. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with all who registered today and are on our growing email list. I am pleased to welcome Lana Millman, CEO of Liberate Art, Inc., who has been a leading expert fighting the cultural boycott campaign against Israel since 2011. Lana is an attorney and 20-year veteran of the entertainment industry, whose previous career included serving in both business and creative capacities at CBS, Warner Brothers, and Paramount. Lana was the premier director of Creative Community for Peace, an entertainment-based NGO. She has made it her life mission to educate others about the tactics, strategies, and real goals of the BDS movement and how its spokespeople target artists. Lana Millman has worked with representatives of over 1,000 artists targeted by BDS, including Alicia Keys, Cyndi Lauper, and Pitbull. In 2014, she circulated a statement in support of Israel's right to defend itself, and it was signed by over 300 Hollywood luminaries and was published in dozens of international publications. Following her presentation, Lana will take questions from the audience, and the Q&A will be moderated by Virag Gulias, another staunch Zionist. Virag is a former diplomat to the EU, a communications consultant and coordinator for End Jew Hatred, the grassroots Jewish civil rights movement. Please put your questions in the Q&A box on your Zoom screen, not the chat box. It's now my pleasure to welcome the courageous, creative, and indomitable Lana Millman.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's my pleasure to speak to your audience today. I wrote my book, Artists Under Fire, based upon my 11 years experience fighting the cultural boycott campaign against Israel. This facet of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is, in my opinion, the most dangerous because it leeches off of the reach, the fame and publicity of famous and international entertainers to spread fallacious lies about Israel. When in my experience, over the last 11 years, have reached out and spoken to the representatives of over 1,000 artists who are scheduled to perform in Israel. I spoke to them about what to expect. I normalized the situation for them. I answered their questions, but it became more and more important to me as it became more common knowledge in the entertainment industry about what to expect, what would happen to artists who wanted to perform in Israel, that it was time to take these issues to the general public. And I thought it was important to write a book on this, because this is not a soundbite topic. When I first began my research, I Googled on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles the acronym BDS and Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. And I was actually quite surprised to see that although there was a plethora of books on the subject, they were all anti-Israel. They were all filled with the lies and anti-Semitic messaging of this group. So I decided, with my legal background, that I would put BDS on trial. And what this book does, unlike many other books right now that are very important for everyone to read, is it has a laser focus on the BDS campaign, and specifically the cultural boycott campaign. I tell the stories of entertainers like Alicia Keys and Katy Perry and John Bon Jovi, who are harassed and bullied and put through this public gauntlet of shaming just because they want to perform for their Israeli friends. And then I also tell the stories of Israel bashers like Mark Ruffalo and Gigi and Bella Hadid, who are stirring the pot and are laying the groundwork for a boycott against Israel. But also, very importantly, I really focus in on drawing a direct connection between the classic anti-Semitic lies that have led to the persecution of Jews and violence against Jews for centuries, and the BDS messaging we are hearing. The power of celebrities, the power of people who hijack their name and likeness, because they are media magnets, any story about them in conjunction with Israel or anything else receives enormous attention. And therefore, all of these lies about Israel that BDS is telling, that gets picked up not only on social media, but on mainstream media as well. And one of the things I also add, which I hope is beneficial, is at the end of each chapter, I provide a very simple next step for people who really want to make a difference.
I found, having read the book, I found that very motivating. It was very helpful. And part of the purpose of our series is to find out how to fight back. So that was encouraging, while it was upsetting to find out how many are against us. Do you think there are people who are pro-Israel that have followings as large as the anti-Israel crowd, and any that are literally campaigning for Israel as opposed to just standing strong and forging ahead and going to Israel? Are there any that are actually part of the campaign to defend Israel and to beat down the lies?
Yes, there are. There's Bill Maher, there's Jay Leno, there's Jennifer Lopez, there's Justin Timberlake. All of these, Lady Gaga, all of these people have come out with positive, reaffirming statements on Israel. But part of what we need to do is we need to do our job. When Israel's detractors say negative things about Israel on social media, they get thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of likes and shares. Whereas when celebrities like Claire Danes will say something, that doesn't get the same amount of traction. There are enough people who support Israel that can make a difference. The question is being active. And I'd just like to take a second to explain exactly what the cultural boycott is and what it does. Whenever an international artist of any race or creed wants to perform for their Israeli friends and fans, the BDS, anti-BDS crusaders go on social media. They make false statements accusing Israel of crimes against humanity like genocide and apartheid. And then they accuse the artists of supporting those false allegations. They create like a synergy between it. This damages or attempts to damage the artist's reputation, career, and sometimes even threatens their lives. Now, one of the things that I discovered is that even the most popular artists will often take a step back because there is a rush of these really horrendous accusations against them of supporting the murder of babies. And interestingly enough, that we're not talking about thousands of tweets or comments. We're talking frequently of a few dozen or a few hundred, or maybe an open letter that was written and published and picked up by some local publication. So it's a direct attack on them. And more importantly, most people think that the main goal is to get these celebrities to cancel their trips and concert dates in Israel. But that's not the main goal. The true strategy is to use their fame to get news publications and social media campaigns launched, because people are always interested in stories about entertainers. And the flip side of this is the horrendous discrimination, censorship, humiliation, and often death threats that Israeli artists face when they are booking international events. So the same group of people will write the event organizers and lobby for a rescission of the invitation. And it doesn't take a lot of people. When I was in London, I attended a concert of the Jerusalem Quartet. There were probably 15 people outside. They were banging on drums and shouting, "Shame on you," for all of the ticket holders who walked by and went into the concert. You could also hear their screams from the river to the sea in the lulls between pieces. And it's very intimidating. 15 people made a difference. And astonishingly, in the review the following day of the concert, I believe it was by the Evening Standard, a full 1/3 of the review of the concert was about the protesters outside and the liberal guilt that the reviewer felt in attending the event. So it doesn't take a lot of people. Everyone that's involved in listening to this webinar has the power to make a difference.
Do you think that standing outside and being in the counter protest would make a difference? Because what I'm seeing, and I welcome any comments from our audience, is that the Jewish community is loath to do that. We don't stand in counter protest. We feel it will look like we're enhancing the conflict, creating conflict, that we're subject to the claim then that we're racist, anti-Palestinian racism is the new thing. I didn't even know it was the thing, but this is the week, it's the new thing. So Jews don't want to be seen doing that. Do you think it would have an impact?
I think it is important to show up to protests and events. It is not, and a lot of them, especially when they are thrown by the pro-Israel community, those are the ones that are really important to go to. What is the most effective way to reach and have a contrary impact is to personally reach out, either by writing the representative of the artist or going on social media and thanking the artists who go to Israel and liking other people's social media tweets. There's so much tension and argument that goes on social media. And I understand that, and a lot of speakers will tell you how important it is to know the facts. And I don't disagree with that. The more you know, the more grounded and strong you feel in your ability to speak out. But what is incredibly effective is speaking about the way you feel, making it personal. We are Jews, we have our own personal experience and our own personal reaction when we see these hateful things going on, and when some artists will speak out and demonize Israel and say that they are occupiers and human rights violators. That has a real impact on us. And if we speak out about that, that's very effective. That's what resonates with the artists. And if you want the most bang for your buck in terms of all your social media tweeting and all your activism, I say target celebrities because they're the ones that have millions of followers. You can argue with every Tom, Dick, and Harry about whether or not there has ever been a sovereign Arab state, and of course there has not. But where you really are going to be effective is if you direct your conversations to celebrities, because that's where it's going to get seen. And don't get sidetracked. And if this spirals down into like hate mongering and name calling, then what you do is you just tag the celebrity and say, please examine what your comment, look how this has descended into hate speech. Is this really what you want? It's very effective. They do read their social media. They do not farm all of this out. And they are, and by the way, publicists are obligated to forward your letters to their clients. Now, I can't guarantee they always do, but I do know that they have that obligation. So one of the things that Liberate Art does is that we talk about this in our newsletters, and we provide you with contact information so that you can write a short note, speak from your heart, and talk to the celebrity. And thank yous are just as important, and even more important sometimes, to people who do go and do support Israel than making arguments against people who demonize Israel.
Just before we go to Virag, I have one last question, and then she will call on, she's got questions from the audience. Can you say a little bit more about Liberate Art and what your main purpose is, and how are you reaching people? Is it something people join? Is it a newsletter just to tell us what to do? How are you organized, and can you tell us more about what you're doing?
Well, Liberate Art, our tagline is Liberate Art from BDS. And I have a website which provides a lot of information. There's links to my YouTube channel where you'll see me discussing specific issues in typically 2 to 3 minute videos that will answer very specific charges. Just like I do in the book, I actually have a chapter in the book which addresses the false charges against Israel by and celebrities such as Jon Stewart and John Oliver, and I answer them. So that's one way. The other way is to sign up for the newsletter to get up-to-date information, to get contact information so that you can reach out. And it's really simple. You don't have to, I provide the little bit of facts that you know, and the rest has to come from your heart. And the other way is on Twitter and on Instagram. If you follow me on those sites, all you really have to do is share and like. And let's see those numbers build up, because and I will tag these celebrities so they will see that people have contrary opinions to what they are seeing generally on social media.
Thank you. So Virag, over to you.
Hi, Andrea, and hi, everyone. Welcome, everyone who has joined us today. And it's no secret that I've known Lana for the last, I think, like 5-6 years already. So when your book came out, it was kind of like I felt so much part of it. I was so proud of you. And I really think that even like for me, who has been in this industry for almost a decade now, you provided added value, and I learned from you, regardless of, as I said, me being so involved. So thank you so much for actually really putting out a book of such a high quality and of value, and not even talking about, I know how much work was it to put together. We do have some questions, but before we get there, I think we have several people here in the audience, and we kind of went in medias res into the topic, but we never really defined the tactics that the BDS is using when it comes to cultural boycott. So I think it's way more palpable out there what happens on college campuses, but maybe that would be something useful if you could share with us, like what are the tactics the BDS supporters are using against, certain artists?
Thank you, Varun, and thank you for your help these last 6 years. You have been my right arm, and it's truly, truly appreciated. Yes, when artists announce a concert date or trip to Israel, they are faced with a multifaceted boycott campaign. One of the first levels, one of the first tactics, and the most common that you would imagine, is attacks on social media. And just to back up, people will say, well, how did these Israel haters find out about it? Particularly with musicians, you book a concert, you have to advertise it. It's on the internet that coming up July 4th, 50 Cent appearing in Tel Aviv. Therefore, everybody knows about it, including Israel's haters. So they get that information and they immediately begin a social media campaign. They start saying, how could you go? Israel's an apartheid state. And particularly if it's a Black artist, like 50 Cent is, a rapper, then they will focus on racism and apartheid. So those are where the accusations start. The second level is just these stories alone now get picked up. The call for a boycott gets picked up by mainstream media. It used to be, when I first started out, really the only organizations that picked up these stories and talked about it were the Electronic Intifada or Mondo Weiss or other organizations that are clearly anti-Israel. And then I've seen this progression where normal, even depending on different spectrums politically, from The Guardian to Yahoo News, CBS News, will pick up stories about the boycott campaign. And the bigger the name, the more information, more stories there are. And when Roger Waters, the co-founder of Pink Floyd, specifically attacks someone like the Rolling Stones, and you have two megastars going at it, you get dozens and dozens of stories about the effort to get them to cancel. And every single story repeats the BDS allegations. Another thing that happens is protests outside of the concerts. Nick Cave, formerly of the Bad Seeds, he had like an 8-stop tour throughout Europe, ending in Israel. There were protests every single concert along the way, Palestinian flags waving in the audience. And this, he never buckled. And in fact, he ended up very ironically saying that this kind of harassment and bullying just deepened his conviction to perform in Israel. However, that's not always the case. Gill Scott Harem, the jazz player who performer, he actually, in his last stop before Israel, there was so much screaming at him from the audience. He ultimately, finally canceled at the very last minute. He just didn't have the courage, and he died, I think, like a year later. So they're very effective. They not only harass the performer, but they inform every single person who goes to their concerts. And we're often talking about tens of thousands of people, that there's something sinister about going to Israel. So that's another tactic. A third, also on social media, they use memes, and memes are very emotional ways of conveying anti-Semitic lies. For example, there'll be an image of Bon Jovi set against fighter planes dropping bombs. So you're associating, and of course on the bottom, don't play, don't support war crimes, don't play in Israel. So you have something very evocative. Scarlett Johansson, when she supported SodaStream, which is an Israeli company, there were memes associating her with blood bubbles. And there was a Jewish star carved into her forehead that circulated. Then, of course, there are actually death threats. Paul McCartney got a death threat. There are numerous artists who have come out and admitted that they are felt physically intimidated because of the either direct or implied physical or threats of physical harm against them. And the last one, which I want to talk about, which is something that everyone in this audience can do, is they write open letters. Now, we also, by the way, can and should circulate petitions and statements supporting the performance of international artists who want to go to Israel and gather signatures that support them. But what's really effective are open letters. And what's the difference? An open letter comes from an individual or sometimes two individuals. And it really speaks from the heart, and they're emotional statements. And these statements, if you can get them on social media, and they can, by the way, send them to you and I and all of these sponsors that are on this list for this event, and we publicize them, sometimes those get picked up by mainstream media. And don't be afraid to write a letter to a small publication, a local publication, because if they print it and that gets on the internet and circulated, the entertainers see that and respond to that. So an example of that was Lorde, who is an Australian, she at the time was a teen pop star, who got a letter from a Palestinian and a Jewish New Zealander, because she's from New Zealand, urging her and talking about their personal experiences and asking her not to play in Israel, and she folded. J.K. Rowling got a letter from a teacher in, I believe she was in Gaza, who, when J.K. Rowling, who totally is against the cultural boycott and signed a statement to that effect, she was inundated. But what stood out the most was this personal letter from this teacher who talked about how much Harry Potter series meant to her and how she identified with them and how this was crushing and how the Palestinians felt betrayed by this. And that was the one thing that J.K. Rowling felt compelled to respond to. We can all do that.
Thank you for all these examples and answers. I'm monitoring the questions coming in. So I took note of the Kate Winslet, but I'm gonna leave that to the last because several people are asking about that. You know what comes to my mind also, and I would like your opinion on that you listed so many unethical, immoral, and just like absolutely wrong tactics that the BDS is using. So what do you think makes artists believe them or actually go along with them? So when they cancel a concert, is it really because they are just scared, or they really do believe what the BDS is telling them, that Israel is indeed an apartheid? So they cancel the culture because they really agree with BDS, or they cancel the concert, because BDS threatened them, or what are they afraid of when they actually go and cancel a concert. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Well, first of all, it's very important for everyone to know that cancellations occur a tiny percent of the time. For a 2-year period, I kept track of every artist who was invited or who signed up and wanted to perform in Israel, and tracked all of the BDS campaigns urging them to cancel. 5% ended up canceling. Only 2% or 2.5% of, so 2.5% of the total did so in response to the BDS, and like less than a handful in support of BDS. So it's not like there is a wave of cancellations that are happening. The vast majority of artists stand up to these attacks on their reputation and go. I have a chapter written that answers that question. It begins with the question, well, if artists really don't like cultural boycott campaigns, why do any of them, back down? And why are we seeing more than a boycott? Why are we seeing this rise of what I call a class of performers that are Israel bashers? And again, another chapter in the book really talks about a continuum. This is not a black and white situation. It's not like the X amount of artists support Israel, X amount don't. It's really a continuum, and it's important for people to understand that. And the answer to that question is that they get their information from the same sources that everybody else in the world does. So they're reading the same newspapers, they're seeing the same social media, they are aware of what's going on college campuses. So that's one reason. Mm-hmm. Another reason has to do with the universal left or progressive leanings of artists. Mm-hmm. And that is understandable. I've had many conversations with my friend Mark Pellegrino, who's an actor, about why that is. And that's because the BDS messaging is an emotional message. And most of Israel's defenders answer those emotional accusations with facts, as opposed to with counter emotions, which is why I am urging people to incorporate their feelings in their responses. And the last is that there is a movement afoot that we are seeing throughout the West, and certainly here in the United States, called intersectionality, which the essence of which is saying that all people who are oppressed their oppression overlaps and are dependent on one another. So they should all support each other in the fight against oppression, in the fight against the white colonist oppressor. And Jews have been, despite our thousands of years of persecution, have been conveniently left out by the left in this sacred circle of the oppressed. So, and that's because it gets back to, and again, I think a crux of this book, and I show this with specific stories and examples about how whatever is bad in the world, anything that's considered evil at any time gets associated with Jews. So sometimes we're accused of being communists, sometimes we're accused of being capitalists, and today when racism and colonialism is widely disdained across the world, Jews are being accused of land theft and apartheid. So these celebrities pick up this language. And Artists Under Fire addresses that and invites people to challenge that publicly, so that we do not allow them to repeat these lies that are costing us, that are creating discrimination against us and violence against us, without raising their voices, without letting, without there being consequences for that.
Right. Thank you for that. It was a loaded answer. I have so many follow-up questions actually, but I like that you touched upon, you know, the ideological aspect of it, how it's really tend to come from the left, and those artists are the ones who go along with this BDS. And so one person asked here, and I think it's a legit question, because I myself, when I started, you know, to understand this industry better, I was so surprised that Roger Waters, oh my God, I actually should not listen to him because of all the things he's doing. So I'm still struggling with finding a list of people who are artists, for that matter, who are supportive of Israel, and the list of those that maybe I should boycott or I should not buy their products anymore. But is there any list, and that is the proper question here, is there any list of those who are pro-Israel or anti-Israel, so that a person can decide whether I go to that certain concert or I just gonna boycott them, or what is, you know, how can we go about that?
There is a chapter in the book that it says Israel supporters, and that is the beginning of the list. The other thing is to follow Liberate Art, follow me, so you get up-to-date information about that. And also what I do is I discuss not only the key primary BDS advocates, artist advocates, which are few, and you'll be surprised how many you've never heard of, by the way, who are at the forefront. If you did a side-by-side of the people that have gone to Israel or supported Israel, like on one side would be Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, Justin Bieber, Jennifer Lopez, Lady Gaga, Cyndi Lauper, John Bon Jovi, the Rolling Stones, Helen Mirren, Bill Maher, Jay Leno, and then on the other side, I gave you all the people who are out there hating Israel, calling for a boycott. Well, you've heard of Roger Waters, but how many people have heard of Brian Eno and Thurston Moore and Young Fathers? I mean, the list, just in terms of the magnitude of their success and who they are, is night and day. Most of the people would not know. And there's one place where I really actually enjoyed listening. There was a petition that was signed by 600 artists, that, which I know was done just so that this particular organization would have a go-to list whenever the next artist wants to book in Israel. All these 600 artists are asking you to cancel. I spent probably 3 hours trying to find the most popular, most well-known people on the list, and I had to Google them because I had never heard of them. So, and those were the best. And I think it's like a short paragraph. So I do go through and I do call them out, and I think what I'm increasingly concerned about is not so much the artists who are trumpeting the cultural boycott and asking other artists, and that's part of it, is that what Roger Waters does, he just doesn't boycott himself. So fine, don't play in Israel. Azoi, right? No, what he does is that he goes after other artists publicly in the public domain and accuses them of the most vile things you can imagine because they book concert dates in Israel. So he inserts himself into all of these things. It's not that if these people don't want to go, don't go. And the other thing, another really popular list is APUP, which is Artists for Palestine UK. And again, it's a long list of signatories of people who swore that they're never going to go and perform in Israel. And once again, you look at that list and most of them will never even have the opportunity to do that. They're not invited. So a lot of it is filler. And I personally, anyone is free to boycott whoever you want. Don't listen to, burn all your Pink Floyd albums if that's what you choose to do. I'm not focused on that. I am focused on calling Roger Waters out, mocking him. He comes out with videos that are so embarrassing. Not only are they like rife with, in my opinion, outrageously anti-Semitic statements, they're cringeworthy. I mean, he embarrasses himself. So I think we have a lot more fun and to make fun of him and mock him and call out his hypocrisy than we are trying to get people to boycott his next world tour.
Can I just interrupt for a second then, Vera, because it's an interesting story that is in Lana's book about Roger Waters, who himself somehow got converted to BDS. He didn't start out this way. Can you just summarize what happened? Because that really surprised me.
Yes, I think the chapter is called The Man Behind the Curtain. And I think from what I've seen is the most comprehensive analysis of Roger Waters and his journey. And what happened was in 2006, he was invited by Shuki Weiss, who's a huge concert promoter, to perform in Israel. And he got attacked by BDS and people urging him not to perform in Israel. And his very first response, which is the response of 99.9% of artists, is no, I'm not going to discriminate against my Israeli fans. I don't particularly approve of Tony Blair's government, or from time to time other governments, but I'm not holding the population responsible for that. The pressure grew, and a turning point in his life was when he was contacted by BDS co-founder Omar Barghouti, and he sat down with Omar Barghouti, and that was a huge turning point in his life. He then subsequently ridiculously moved the concert to a chickpea farm outside of Tel Aviv, created terrible traffic jams, but the crowd welcomed him, embraced him, loved him. It was fantastic. And in the middle of this concert, he calls upon the audience and says, you're the youth of Israel, I invite you, let's tear down these walls. And there was a pause to that, because it was really a call of, and later on, the people in the concert got interviewed and they said, yeah, but if he's talking about the security barrier, we have to make sure that we're safe. We do want the walls coming down. And after that, the man has talked about that concert and totally rewritten history. He now claims that when he said to the audience, let's tear down these walls, the entire concert fell into silence. You could hear a pin drop. And because, according to him, this was a prime example and prime proof that the Israelis do not want peace. And in his syllogism, if the Israelis do not want peace, well, then that proves that they are monstrous people and cannot be reasoned with, and no one should go there because their minds cannot possibly be changed. But he had an evolution, and I won't take up too much time, and you can see him getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and now he is in the abyss. She is just like, cannot shut up about it.
And that in and of itself should be a red flag for most people, this obsession, whenever someone is this obsessed and like everything is about Israel. Like my personal point here, and I would welcome your thoughts also, that these artists who so vehemently stand against Israel, but they would not stand up against actual regimes who are abusing human rights. It just such a double standard that it's just hard that followers actually eat that up. You know, like Bella Hadid shares something and her followers don't question whether it is true or not. And this was also like part of the questions here is like, how do we really fight against someone like Bella Hadid, who has, you know, more followers than Jews in the world, and then she's just so effortlessly influencing people?
Well, you do it by speaking out, by speaking out. If you feel that what she said is anti-Semitic, you say that's anti-Semitic. And one of the things, again, the guide that's in the book, it really helps you identify legitimate criticism of Israel from demonization. And demonization is anti-Semitic. It is calling Jews evil. And I am telling you, everyone is aware of that. Yeah, she'll say something really horrible and get 2 million likes. But she also has had to take down posts. She has also had to backtrack. She's also been edited after the fact. All of them have, when they go too far. And we need the organizations to do that, but we also need the people to do that. And you do that by rating their representatives, telling them what you think, personalize it. This should not be about a history lesson. It should be about your experience as either as a Jew or as a human being who empathizes with the plight of Jews, and you speak about that and they respond. Now, the point is, we have to make it clear to them that when they cross the line, there will be consequences. And there might be 2 million people that like, just because they think she's beautiful and she's a fashion icon, so they like everything that she does and says. But that there's going to be 2,000 people out there who are going to call her out for her Jew hatred and for fostering war, actually fostering war. We can do that. I saw this whole thing go from a trickle where there were like 200 people max out there activated, signing every petition, every, petitions that would get 210 signatories. And then it grows. And this is how it grows, by speaking out, and other people will join you. And there is an opportunity. We have the newsletter that will do that. You can go to liberateart.net and sign up for the newsletter. But I really urge people, I try to simplify this for you in the book. You do not have to be an expert on all things Israel. There are just a few things that you really need to have internalized to give you the power to do that. And one of them is to know that we are indigenous to the land and we got it fair and square.
Can I just ask, we know that the BDS movement is highly centralized in that Barghouti and his colleagues have websites and disseminate information, and every year they run a campaign, and then all of the parties to this all participate almost en masse under direction. Why is there no counter movement? How could we organize centrally, globally, an anti-BDS campaign in all the organizations? You've seen we have 30 organizations that sponsor a webinar. We're all committed, but there's no central direction, no one messaging, everything you've said to me resonates, and it should be said to every single Jewish organization globally, but that isn't happening. There's no major drumbeat that says on such and such a day or month, our anti-BDS message is this, and we all do it. Would that not help? Could that not happen?
Yes, and I see, yes, and I see organizations that send out talking points. There's the Focus project that does that will take current events and help digest it for you so you understand what the key talking points are. But one of the things we have started is the movement called End Jew Hatred. And that is a function that this movement can serve. And also, it's not, one of the things that I've witnessed is that it's called BDS movement.net, I believe. It basically puts out information about like Apartheid Week. It creates banners that people can download. It gives the names of people you can get to come speak. They give you ideas and connect you with moving exhibits so that people have recognized that there's a central place where they can get tools. And I think End Jew Hatred movement should step in and assume that role so that we all know where to get it. But it has to come from not just the leaders. It's not about leaders. It's about Jews owning this. It's about people who support the Jews and recognize that this is we are in the middle of a historic moment. And there have always been non-Jews who have stood up and stood by our side. And they are out there still. And they have to, this is we will not thrive without a grassroots movement. Without each person on this webinar understanding that if they make a contribution, something simple, liking tweets, following certain people, if they make a contribution, and by the way, you don't have to come up with a brand new letter every time you write an artist. If your personal story and your connection, the reason why you care is one thing, well, that's what you have to say. And you can say that same thing to 50 artists. It's not, this is not a homework assignment. It's sit down and you spend 10 minutes and you look inside your heart and talk about how you feel. And then it's like one opening, and each subject line to these representatives should say, thank you, and then the name of the artist. Thank you, Henry Winkler. Thank you, Maroon 5. Thank you. And then they won't open it. I guarantee you they'll open it.
Right. And that's nice. As a nice bridge to our closing question. And that is Kate Winslet. So there were like at least 5 people asking about that. So I give you the floor on that. What happened? What can we do? And what's wrong in the situation?
Yes, I was contacted about this. There is a new documentary film that is out. It's called 11 Days in May. It is being narrated by Kate Winslet. And it is allegedly, well, it is about 60 children, Gazan children, who were killed in the most recent conflict a year ago. And I have a lot of compassion, rahmanas, as my mother would say, for the loss of innocent lives. I mean, it's really horrible, and my heart goes out to the loss of these innocent children. But what this documentary does is that although it doesn't mention Israel, I think maybe once or twice, but it goes out of its way not to mention Israel. Everybody knows it's about Israel. And, they tell really tearful, painful stories about the loss of children. But what is completely absent is the suffering on the part of Israelis and the provocation and the instigation by Hamas for this war, and how the Hamas actually puts Palestinian children in the line of fire and is responsible for the death of these children. All of that is ignored. And Kate Winslet is bringing enormous clout and dignity to this film by narrating it. And when asked about it, I was incredibly disappointed. She said, well, all I wanted to do was talk about children and how children are needlessly dying in war. Well, that's baloney, because if that were true, you'd be talking about the loss of innocent and the suffering of Israeli children as well. And nobody, is going to walk away from seeing that movie and come up with any other impression other than that Israelis are killing innocent children. So I urge everybody, this is your opportunity to start. We have created a slide that you'll see at the end of this session, which has the information of Kate Winslet's publicist and her agent, as well as their phone numbers, and you can write them. And I think, Andrea, you're also going to share that, I hope, in your next bulletin, this information. But yes, here's your opportunity. Reach out and talk to them. Tell them how you feel about this. There are several articles, one in the Jewish Chronicle by David Rose, another in Israeli Cool by David Lang, that talk about this film if you want to educate yourself a little bit more. And by the way, the co-director, the one who shot all of the footage in Gaza, is actually a huge supporter of Hamas, as well as his father is. So if she is just trying to whitewash what she did and saying she's simply talking and speaking about on behalf of the child victims of war, that's baloney. So express your feelings, express how you feel about Israeli children being ignored and what you believe her contribution is to continuing to foment antagonism and strife between these people.
Thank you.
And
Lana.
read my book, get my book, Artists Under Fire.
Plug for the book. The book is excellent, and it's refreshing to read a book that has actual concrete suggestions rather than just telling the tragedy of the BDS movement and all the anti-Israelisms going on. Thank you so much for your time, for your creativity, your energy, your passion, Lana. That was wonderful. And the same to Virag, who we know is equally passionate. I didn't mention something, Virag, which you should. What is the banner that you operate under? Almost Jewish? Is that what
Yes, that would be me. Yes.
Almost Jewish. That is Virag, and we're delighted to have you and to work with you on End Jew Hatred as well. The organization I'm with, CAEF, is very involved. And I will tell you that thanks to David, who is our IT web consultant with us today, he is working on an End Jew Hatred Canada website, and we will produce on it, and Lana, you might like this, a page called The Wall of Shame and a page for the Wall of Courage. And I now understand what I'm going to do with that, because I think you've given me lots of ideas today. So thank you everyone for participating. I hope you will stay active and involved, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Take care, be well.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again to our many sponsors.